Okay, so we are in the password.jsx file. This is our main component, and the very first thing I want to do here is to define the rules. It will be an object, and the key in that object will be the names, like uppercase. Those are exactly the same names that I would use as attributes when I render this component in my script.jsx. And each rule will have a message, so that message will be shown on the web page. It will have a regex pattern. That pattern will be used to check the password against this rule. So for example, uppercase, it's characters capital A to capital Z. And then lowercase, it will be different set of characters. So this way, you can have a customizable set of rules. You can keep adding more and more rules, or you can modify a pattern a little bit. For example, special characters must have at least one special character. You can change it to your own definition of what is special character. Maybe you don't want hashtags or you don't want dollar signs. So once you remove them from your pattern, they would not be in this criteria, in this rule. Basically, if people use them, that would not satisfy the password. Same thing with numbers. You can remove the numbers completely or change to a subset of numbers. Let's say not from 0 to 9, but from 0 to 5. I don't know why you would want to do that, but it's still possible with this pattern and this architecture. Now, if you're not familiar with regex in JavaScript, they're special object type, and the way we define them, we use this slash notation. So the regex is encapsulated in slashes. Over 6 basically condition that the password must be larger than 6 characters. Okay, so the next statement would be the definition of the password component. Password equals React.createClass, the standard method to create a component. Then in the getInitialState, I want to set the state for the beginning. The strength would be an empty object, and the password would be empty as well. Visibility would be set to false because you don't want to show the password to everyone. Maybe you're doing a presentation or something. And OK would be set to false as well. We will see what OK is doing later. Check strength, that's the method that will check for the strength. I'm using underscore this equal this to transfer the proper context. And then password would be taken from the e.target.value. I'm setting the state password to the password value. So this is a controlled component. And the strength object is empty right now. So what I want to do, I want to iterate through the props. The props are criteria. And with each iteration, I want to check if that attribute, first of all, if it's in our rules array. I'm sure it is. And if the pattern from the rules array matches what we have in the password value. So I'm checking that the prop exists, and then I'm checking for the pattern of that prop. And if it's passing, if the pattern is matching, then I'm creating that property in the strength and setting the strength state as well. So set state is asynchronous. So that's why I'm specifying this callback only after the strength is set. I'm going through the strength again. I'm using object.keys, and I'm comparing it to the length of the props given to me. So in this case, it's 5 props, and if all 5 conditions are met, I'm setting OK to true. So OK basically means it's a green light, the password is good, go and execute it. So maybe the verifying the length is not the best criteria. Maybe you need to go one by one and do that as well. It works for now. So the idea here is that check strength will set the state of the strength and of the OK and also of the password properly. Now we want to toggle the visibility of the password. Remember that checkbox? So this is the method that will enable us to see the password or to hide it and not see it again. It's very simple, just setting the state to the opposite of the visible state. So basically we're switching from true to false, from false to true. And again, it's asynchronous, so if you want to put some console logs, you can do it here. So the next method will generate the random password. It's rather simple because all we're doing, we're calling that library, generate password. And then we will attach this event handler to the generate button. So we're setting the state visible true because we want to see the password, we want to save it, maybe in some application like 1Password or LastPassword. Then we just password equals generate passwords. And on the callback, we want to update the criteria to make it strike through. So we invoke in the check strength. And remember, when we're using closures, like in this case, we're creating a synchronous callback, synchronous function definition. This will mutate. That's why we need underscore this. Or you can use that equal this, or self equal this, or you can use bind.this, bind parenthesis this. And in the check strength, I'm kind of faking this target because it's not really normal browser events, so but I'm passing the value of the password here. You can see, because we will need it. We'll need it up there in the check strength method. Okay, so far so good. So we are pretty much done with the password component, except for the render method. If you remember, render method is mandatory, so let's implement it. Render function. Then we are declaring this variable processed rules. So what it will do, it will go over the keys from the props, which are criteria or the rules, and it will map out them using .map function. We're checking if this .props keys. So if that property exists, we return the key. Then in the rule, we'll return the rule, which is defined on the first line. And is completed, we need to check for the strength object using that key. And then if it's not defined, it's false. So it means the rule is not completed, the rule is not satisfied. And just to show you, I'm using bind this here instead of using underscore this. You can use either style. I'm seeing bind more often than underscore this. And of course, if you're using fat arrows with ES6, that's a better option. And now we're finally writing some JSX. I'm using well from Twitter Bootstrap and label for HTML. That's instead of for. Remember, we cannot use for HTML. If we're going to use for, we need to use for HTML. And the password input, that's another component which we will need to implement. It will use unchanged this .strength. So it will use the method from the password component, even it's a different component. It's a child component. And then password visibility, that's our checkbox. Checked attribute or checked property will be coming from the state, this.state.visible, and on change we will be triggering toggle. So now our strings info or strings password meter. So we're passing the process rules. That's what will constitute the text output, the strike throughs, etc. And password generates, that's the button to generate the password. On click, it will trigger this.generate, which is the generate method, and it will generate a new password. And button save, it's not going to do much except that we will make it disabled, this.state.ok, and I'm using ternary condition here, and the class disabled, and if it's okay, it's not disabled. So because I'm using state, it will React will automatically update that class. So let's go over password input one more time. With a controlled component, because we're setting the value to the state, so React is controlling this component. It never can be different from the state. The representation, the view is always the same as the state. And then the visibility, it's just HTML attribute. We're setting it to the state again. That's how we can toggle it from visible to hidden. Okay, so we're done with the password component, but now we have 4 more components to go. How fun it is, right? So let's start with password generate, where password generate equals react.create class. So this component needs to output a button. When we click that button, it will call the onClick method. So return button. This is a special React syntax that passing all the props from the parent to the children to this button. So basically whatever props we're setting up in the password component, like onClick, will be passed to this button. Same thing with this.props.children. This will be the name, generate just the text, and this will give us the onClick. The reason why I decided to create it a separate component, because just first of all, just to show you, second of all, we have these classes. So now our classes, they're independent of the password component. This is how we can separate the visual representation. We can change the classes here if we want to, or we can create it a link or something else. The next component is PasswordInput. This is the input box for the password. It's a controlled component, but again, like password generate, it's rather trivial. We have render function, that's all we do here. And we return an input with a class name of form control, and the type is coming from the visible. So we're flipping, it's either a text or an HTML. To the text or a password. And then the name, we're using the prop name. Values are basically the same attributes. And unchanged, we would be using unchanged. That's it for the password. So the trick here that makes it visible or hidden is that we're flipping the type from text to password. Text is shown, password is hidden. The next component is PasswordVisibility. This is our checkbox. that we use to hide and show password. Again, it's one of those dumb components. It's very declarative, very static. Probably the better way would be to write it as a stateless component, which you will discover later in the book. So we're using label, and the input type is a checkbox. The checked is set to the property, just either false or true. And then on change, we just invoke the property, which is the handler from the password component. Then the text label show password. Closing the label. So the input is inside of the label, so we can also click on the text. If you don't have this, you would have only to click on that small tiny checkbox. So that's why I usually want to wrap your input and the text in a label. Okay, and the last component, our strength meter. PasswordInfo equals React.createClass. In this component, we need to output the list of the rules, and also, depending on whether the rule has been met or not, we need to differentiate it visually. Again, I'm using underscore this equal this, and then I'm returning a div. Inside of that div container, I have a h4 heading, password strength, and then I have unordered list, which is just another name for bullet points. I'm iterating through the rules property using .map, and each rule is a processed rule. The one that you saw earlier, it has is completed. So I'm checking for processed rule.isCompleted. If it's completed, then I'm using strike through, which is a strike element. And as a key, remember we need the keys. In React lists, I'm using the key. And then the message is a normal string for humans to be able to know like what rule has been met or not. And in case the rule hasn't been met, I'm not using strike through, just a text. And that's what I'm checking in the test as well. Strike versus the text node. So I'm closing the tags. And then the last statement, window.password equals password. I'm exposing password as a global variable, just in case. So that's pretty much it for this component. Let's go over it one more time. It's a rather long file. So we have rules, which are patterns and messages for the strength of the password. You can add more, you can subtract, you can modify. It's a very customizable widget. And the password component is our main component. We're using 4 states: strength, password, which is the value of the password itself, visible, boolean, and OK boolean. In the strength, in check strength, we're checking for the strengths, and if the criteria is satisfied, we mark it as true in the strength state, and if all of them are satisfied, we mark OK as true, otherwise it's false. Toggle visibility enables us to look at the password or to hide it, and then the generate can generate a password using that module generate password. Then in the render method, we are going through the props and comparing the props, which are criteria. with the state strength one by one. And then we're using that process rules in the PasswordInfo. PasswordInfo is a strength meter. We also have PasswordInput, PasswordVisibility, and PasswordGenerate components. They're rather simplistic. And then we expose the final component at a window. Let's also look at the gulp file to see how we're building our application. So first of all, we include the gulp file. We include the gulp itself. Then we include the source maps, which will enable us to see the proper line number in JSX, which is very good for debugging. And then we're using Babel to compile JSX to the normal JavaScript. Gulp concat and gulp watch, those are another plugins for gulp. Concat will mash all the files together. I'm not using it. And watch, I'm using it for the watch tasks. It's right here on line 14 to 16. So what it's doing, if you have any changes, you can the gulp will restart and recompile everything automatically if you have it in a watch mode. So by default, I'm building it and then watching it. And the build is happening by taking the source file, so everything in the current folder with the JSX extension, which is password.jsx and script.jsx, goes through this pipe over source maps, then over Babel, then source maps again, and then the destination is our JS folder. If you look at the JS folder, you would see password.js. Let's open it up. So it looks similar to JSX, but it's not a JSX, it's a plain JavaScript. So if you want to look at the maps, it looks something like this. It's not very interesting.